Thank you very much. First of all, Provost Joe Bruno has been very modest. Really, the series would not be possible without her support. And I will just take a minute to talk about the purpose and mission of the series. We want to make sure that the expertise, the interests, the passions of our faculty are not limited to the classroom and just the courses they teach. That important topic, important information reaches a much wider audience, and thus we want to help break the barriers between the departments, between the colleges of our university, and between the university and the local community, and that, in our view, in the view of the Provost Colloquium Committee, is the main purpose of this series, and we're very grateful to Provost Bruno for supporting this. I would like to turn to step out of the way of our speaker, Dr. Adam McGlynn. He is an associate professor of political science. He earned his PhD in political science from Stony Brook University in New York. His main fields of research are Latino politics and education policy. He is an elected member of the Nazareth Area School Board and has published articles in the American Journal of Political Science, PS Political Science and Politics, and the Social Science Journal. His presentation is titled Proving Patriotism, Latino Military Service in the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I really do appreciate it. And thank you, Dr. Galperin and Provost Bruno, for your great introductions. And Provost Bruno, you gave me a great context to start my presentation, so thank you. So a little bit of background on how I came to this topic. I too previously was at an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, a place called University of Texas Pan American. If you tried to look it up, it wouldn't exist anymore though. It's now the University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley after it merged with UT Brownsville. It was a school that was 80% plus Hispanic. And one of the other things I will say as I get started here, I'm going to use the terms Hispanic and Latino pretty much interchangeably. However, they do not exactly mean the same thing. For this research, they pretty much do. Does anybody know what the difference between Hispanic and Latino is? Don't worry. Yes, so basically Hispanic means you're from a country of Spanish-speaking origin. So, for instance, Spain, if you're from Spain, you are Hispanic. However, if you are from Spain, you are not Latino, because Latino means you are from a country of Latin American origin. So if we do another example of this, if we look at Brazil, for instance, they speak Portuguese. So people from Brazil are Latino, but they are not Hispanic. So you're going to hear that term a lot, and I bring that up because one of the reasons why I think this topic matters and I was interested in it and I wanted to start researching it is because most of the population growth we are seeing in the United States right now is among the Hispanics and or Latino community. So as a political scientist, understanding this population growth, understanding political behavior, and understanding voting behavior of this group is going to be vital to being able to understand elections going forward. So I think we're seeing in pretty much all areas of the social sciences more interest in this population. Okay, but specifically then, why did I start saying, so now you know why I'm interested in Latinos. Why am I specifically interested in military service? Okay, well, when I was in South Texas, one of the things I noticed is that pretty much every single high school had a JROTC program. Okay. We saw that there were numerous veterans of the United States military living there. One of the big political issues at the time was, although this was a region of over 1 million people, there was no veterans hospital, there was no VA hospital there. They had to travel 3+ hours to San Antonio for there to be a veterans hospital. So we saw that this group, in many ways, was facing some level of political disenfranchisement. They were growing in population, but for the most part weren't really being paid the attention to that they deserved in terms of their numbers. So the question then became, we're seeing Latinos, especially in South Texas, enter into the United States military. We know they are the group that's experiencing the most population growth, thus we expect their numbers in the United States military to increase as well. So what happens then? Okay, so in previous work, I was looking at a concept called the poverty draft, and this idea of whether or not the military is targeting low-income students of color, specifically Latinos in South Texas. And the evidence that I find for that was somewhat mixed, but nonetheless, what we did find is that they were going after students that were highly, highly capable. They didn't necessarily want just any student to enter into the military. They were looking at Latino students who essentially were the best and the brightest. And one of the reasons they were doing that is because we see the Latino community faces a disproportionate amount of poverty. And to the point that there was a letter written by Secretary of Education Rod Page and the Secretary of Defense at the time, Donald Rumsfeld, at the beginning of George W. Bush's term, basically discussing that under the No Child Left Behind Act, military recruiters had to be given equal access to American high schools as colleges and universities did. And if they didn't provide that access, they risked losing federal education funding. So we saw there was going to be this push for the military to enter into high schools. And again, we wanted to understand what the impact of that was going to be. And the letter specifically states that for many students, entering into the military was going to be their best opportunity for post-high school success, knowing that the socioeconomic status of many Latinos in the United States might limit their ability to go to college without the help of the military and without the help of the GI Bill. So this really kind of sets the context of why I'm interested in the impact of military service on Latinos, but specifically, why am I interested in patriotism, okay? For those students out here looking for research projects, you're going to have to write papers for other classes, and you might sit there and be stuck and say, I have no idea what to write about. I get students coming to me all the time with that. Inspiration can come in almost any circumstance you can possibly imagine. So again, I'm interested in Latinos and political behavior. I'm interested in Latino military service. How do I get interested in patriotism? Well, by watching baseball. So those of you who've had me in a class before know that I am a diehard fan of my beloved New York Mets, so much so that I named my daughter Shea after Shea Stadium. So I'm watching the 2013 All-Star Game, okay, which was hosted by the New York Mets at Citi Field, and it is, we've seen in many baseball games during the seventh inning stretch, they bring someone out to sing God Bless America. So in this instance, they brought out Mark Anthony. Mark Anthony was born and raised in New York City in the Spanish Harlem area of Manhattan. He's a multi-time Grammy Award winner. He's a multi-platinum artist. He is New York City through and through. Okay, pretty much I'm sure all of you have heard of Mark Anthony before. He married Jennifer Lopez. This is someone that is not is highly recognizable. So you would think it makes sense, New York City boy, you bring him out when the All-Star Game's in New York City to sing the national anthem. However, not everyone was thrilled with that. And this is what Twitter looked like as this performance is taking place. And let me tell you this right now, this is the G-rated version of these comments. So what do we see? Another disgrace, Mark Anthony singing God Bless America. Is he even an American citizen? Welcome to America, where God Bless America is sung at our national pastime by a Mexican. Mark Anthony singing God Bless America on the MLB All-Star Game. Am I the only person that finds that un-American? So this led to the question. If you have an American citizen, yes, he's of Puerto Rican descent, he looks like he's a Hispanic. He has darker skin tone than a non-Hispanic Caucasian. But he's widely accepted in pop culture. He's sold millions of records to Caucasians, African Americans, Latinos throughout the United States. But even if he is going to be reduced on national television to just being an undocumented immigrant that people believe crossed the Rio Grande River illegally, then what Hispanic is going to be accepted in the United States? And so this led to the question of what can be done for Latino citizens, people who are citizens of the United States, but happen to have a darker skin color than a Caucasian, what can they do to be accepted, to be recognized as citizens of the United States? And thus, taking that idea, connecting it to my interest in the military, is military service the ultimate act of patriotism? I can make an argument, I'm sure many of you would hopefully agree, that it is. What is more patriotic, what demonstrates more loyalty to your country than risking your life and entering the armed services and serving your country? So the question is, if Latinos do that, will that at least gain them acceptance? Now, not every Latino is going to join the military, of course, but if we see more Latinos joining the military, as we would expect as their population numbers increase, would at that point that allow them to prove their patriotism and be more accepted as U.S. citizens, okay? And have people look beyond simply their skin color and in deciding whether or not they are loyal and patriotic and American citizens. All right. So why is this important, especially in today's context? Well, especially since 9/11, we've seen that people of color are facing more and more concern and facing more and more discrimination. Okay. One of the key issues in the 2016 presidential election, of course, was Donald Trump's proposal to build a wall along the southwestern border with Mexico. We saw, Arizona passed State Bill 1070, the quote-unquote "show your papers" law, basically stating that local law enforcement could ask individuals who they suspected of not being citizens to have to demonstrate their citizenship. The problem with that is, how do you choose who you think is not a citizen and who do you think is? Well, for the most part, they were stopping people based on skin color. So they were, profiling based on race and ethnicity. So in that instance, now we have this discrimination that's pretty much, sort of front and center and kind of not hiding in plain sight. So with that, okay, can we then go back to military service and say, yes, that's how they can demonstrate. They can more and more can demonstrate that they are, fighting for their country. They're joining the United States military. They are just as patriotic as other Americans are. One of the problems that we find with this, though, is that Latinos in the United States don't have the best history when it comes to the United States military. We saw during the Vietnam War that people of color, specifically African Americans and Latinos, because of their socioeconomic status, were less likely to get deferments than many middle-income white citizens were. And what we saw happen during the Vietnam War is, earlier in the Vietnam War, African American casualty rates were disproportionately higher. When we begin to see more public protest about that, then we saw African American casualty rates go down, but Hispanic casualty rates start to go up. We also find that historically, people of color entering the military were less likely to be among the officer ranks. And again, they were more likely to be serving in infantry, which is one of the reasons that we see higher casualty rates. Now, efforts have been made recently to address this. We are starting to see more mentorship for soldiers of color and trying to provide more opportunities for soldiers of color to enter into the officers' ranks. So, this is not something that has fallen on deaf ears, but nonetheless, it's still something that theoretically at least would make the Latino community question whether or not this is actually a good choice. Okay. The other thing we've seen, as I mentioned before, based on my experience in South Texas, is that the growth in JROTC programs at the high school level has been predominantly in low-income areas, areas that have significantly high populations of people of color. So, for instance, Chicago has, a significant amount of JROTC programs. We've seen more JROTC programs starting in South Texas, in Florida. Again, a lot of these communities where we see a significant amount of Latinos living. So with this, we kind of have, a conflict here. One, theoretically, yes, joining the military should then allow you to prove your patriotism if you are a Latino citizen. But on the other hand, you realize that your experiences, or at least the experiences of people like you in the United States military, have not always been that great. Okay, so what do we know about Latinos in the United States military? There has been some research done on this by political scientists. One of the things we see is that Latinos seem to be the exact type of soldiers that the United States military wants. If you look at the Latino culture, they highly value family, they highly value loyalty, and they're dedicated. So these types of traits within their culture make them ideal soldiers. And there have been, high-ranking military officials within the United States military who have said, these are more of the types of soldiers we need. Again, demonstrating why there has been a greater effort to recruit Latino soldiers, in addition to recruiting African-American soldiers as well. They have designed recruitment programs around trying to attract these populations. You see the slogan for one of them up there, Yo Soy El Army, which again was a recruitment package and a recruitment effort made, again, to try to attract Hispanics into the United States military. We also see that, again, Latinos tend to be highly, highly patriotic. One of the concerns that has been brought up, unfortunately, by people in the academic community is this idea that Latinos don't want to acculturate. Latinos want to come to the United States. They only want to speak Spanish, which is why we have to have English-only laws. They do not want to become part of the American fabric. And that's the problem, and that's why we have to limit immigration. Unfortunately, this is not a new story, though. Okay, every group that's ever come to the United States, okay, the first thing they've done when they're in a new place and you don't know anyone, what do? You try to find people that you have something in common with. Okay, so this is why, if you go to New York City, there's a Chinatown and there's a Little Italy. Okay, there are always these ethnic enclaves whenever new groups come to the United States. That has been the history of the United States. And over time, as you have intercultural marriage and people move to different parts of the country, then it doesn't seem as if that group is isolating itself anymore. It's just that Hispanics are the latest group. And so they're being levied with the same exact criticisms as everyone else. However, the research shows that Hispanics tend to be more patriotic than many other racial and ethnic groups. Again, speaking to the reason why the United States military wants to recruit Latinos into its ranks. Okay, so we kind of have this perfect storm. Latinos seem to be the soldiers that, best fit the ideals of the United States military. They're increasing in population, and they're facing this increased discrimination. So what does this research then intend to do? Okay, we asked 3 questions. Okay, what factors drive Latino enlistment? So why are Latinos joining the United States military? Okay, is it because of economic interest? Is it because of patriotism? Is it because of family? We asked several questions in that regard. Okay. Second, in addressing and getting at this concept of proving patriotism, are they, after they have served, finding that their status in the community and their acceptance in the community by people outside of their family has improved? Because if the answer to that is yes, then we have some evidence that they can, in fact, prove their patriotism with service in the United States military. Okay, and then the third part, because of course I'm a political scientist and I have to figure out how everything impacts political behavior, we look at whether or not military service among Latinos increases their desire to become politically engaged. So again, 2 parts of this. 1, are they more accepted as citizens? But 2, do they also then become more active citizens? And there's already been some research out there on that third question, and they do find overwhelmingly that the answer is yes. And this has been one of the, highlighted as one of the benefits of military service for Latinos, is this idea that upon serving, they become more active and engaged citizens in the United States government. So what did we do? We contacted VFWs throughout South Texas and distributed an online survey. Okay. We had 82% of our sample wound up being male from that survey. Again, U.S. military service is predominantly male, so that makes sense. One of the things that we weren't thrilled about in terms of the composition of our sample, we were hoping to get a higher number of Latino respondents. And what we found is, compared to the numbers within these VFWs, the Caucasian, the non-Hispanic white population was overrepresented, and the Hispanic population was underrepresented. So this is one of the reasons that we're actually taking these results, and we made the decision, my colleague and I, Jessica Lavega Monforti, who's at Pace University, we've decided that we're not going to move forward and publish these. We are actually redesigning the survey instrument. So this way, and we're going to have a wider sample. We're now going to go into VFWs in Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and other areas of Texas, because we feel that there's a lot more nuances, nuanced data, nuanced findings that we're going to be able to obtain. So that's one of the limitations of this study, but one we're going to rectify with the next iteration of it. So again, we found 82% male, 68% Latino. One of the interesting things, you've probably been told Latinos are overwhelmingly Democrats, okay? That is true. That's 110% true. But many Latinos are also politically moderate, okay? They are not liberal Democrats. Okay, and so these results bear that out as well. Again, one of the reasons that's the case, if you look at Latinos on social and moral issues, okay, they tend to be more in line with some Republican viewpoints. Why? Because many Latinos are highly, highly religious, okay? They are very dedicated to the religion, and many of them are Catholics and dedicated to Catholic ideas, so things like not supporting a woman's right to choose. So in that instance, again, we see that they're Democrats, but they are politically moderate, which may then influence their views on things like, foreign policy and the role of the military in the world. Okay. On average, our respondents served 10 years in the United States military, and they had 2.3 deployments. We had respondents that served in World War II and respondents that served in more recent theaters in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, the overwhelming majority of our sample were people who served in either the first Persian Gulf War or the more recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Here's one of the interesting things we found, though, which is why, again, we need to go back in and we feel we need to expand this survey. Only 33% of our respondents were employed full-time. However, 50% of them had at least an associate's degree. And one of the questions was, well, were many of them retired maybe? Only, about a fifth of the sample was over the age of 65. So the overwhelming majority of our sample was of working age, but only a third of the sample was actually employed full-time. So again, this is one of the other reasons that we're going to go back in and take a look at this data. So for you students out there, you might say on the first pass at a research project, oh, I didn't get the results I wanted. This didn't turn out the way I expected, okay? That happens to everyone, okay? That's science. If it happens the way you want it to every single time, you're probably fudging the numbers and, basically choosing the results you want to get. And again, that's not true science. All right. So what did we find, okay? These are reasons that our respondents decided to join the military. So we have civic duty, we have patriotism, we have career options, good salary / benefits, the signing bonus, making their family proud, and then travel opportunities, okay? So we felt this kind of ran the gamut of, sort of personal choices and personal benefits to, their role in society. And what do we find? Overwhelmingly, it supports the existing research that, yes, Hispanics are, in fact, a group that is highly, highly patriotic. Under civic duty, the modal category there they ranked it second. So most respondents for civic duty, they ranked that second above other things. And then patriotism was ranked number one for more respondents than everything else. If you look at some of the individual choices, career does matter. One of the reasons career does matter is, again, we talked about that previous research I had done where we looked at the poverty draft. One of the things we did is we went into high schools in South Texas and conducted a survey with those students to find out what they were hearing from recruiters when they were being recruited. And overwhelmingly, what they are hearing about are career opportunities. They're hearing about the GI Bill, they're hearing about job training, more than what are called MOSs, military occupation specialties, more than what they'd be doing in the military, what they would get for military service. So it makes sense that that is up there. But again, most people seem to rank a good salary or benefits as their fourth ranking. The signing bonus was all the way down at the bottom, okay? Which again, is somewhat interesting, and I think also speaks to this idea that civic duty and patriotism matters above other things. Because again, if this idea is that many of these, Latinos who are being recruited are from, lower socioeconomic status areas, then signing bonuses should be a big deal to them if their families don't have a lot of money. But what we're finding, no, it's not. Okay, this is a group that is highly, highly patriotic, that believes in their country, is loyal to their country, and believes that there is their civic duty to serve. Additionally, making their family proud, that matters to some extent, but again, as you can see, a lot less than civic duty and or patriotism. And then finally, travel opportunities didn't really seem to matter much. That the people were more likely to rank that as a 7 out of the 7 options than anything else. Okay. Any questions so far? I'm going to have time for questions and answers at the end, but I know sometimes. Yeah.
Where do Mexicans fall? Are they Latino, Hispanic, or?
So this group, because it's South Texas, it's almost exclusively of Mexican descent. If we were to go into other areas, we were going to Florida, if we'd go into New York, then the sample would become a little more diverse in terms of bringing in Dominicans and Cuban Americans and Puerto Ricans. But because this is South Texas, we asked that question and it was like 98% of Mexican descent, which is one of the other reasons why we want to try to expand the study. Other questions? Okay. Yeah, if we wanted to see if we could, disaggregate that and start looking by different areas of descent. We just didn't have the data to be able to do that, which again, why we want to go back in and do this again. All right, so I know there's a lot on here, okay? So this question was, how did you feel in response to your military service? Okay, so we have several different options here. Were you proud as a result of your military service? Most veterans would probably say yes, they are. In this instance, 81% strongly agreed with that statement, 14% just agreed, which means 95% of people at least agreed with the statement that, they were proud because of their service. Were they proud to be an American? Again, overwhelmingly, over 90% either agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. Again, reinforcing this idea that Latinos are patriots. They are loyal to their country. Asking the question very specifically, am I a patriot? 89% said yes, 9% said neither. But again, you see that less than 3% actually disagreed with that statement that they were not a patriot. Now, getting to the key questions that we looked at, this idea of whether or not they were going to be more accepted and whether or not they could prove their patriotism as a result of their military service. And this is where we get mixed results. The modal category answers for being more accepted by their community and more accepted by those outside of their family and social grouping is neither. They didn't agree with the statement, they didn't disagree with the statement. If we look at the numbers, a slight majority, so you see 25% strongly agreed, 29% agreed that they were more accepted by their community, 21% strongly agreed that they were more accepted by people outside their family and social grouping, 33% agreed with that. So more than 50% said yes, that they did feel some external validation and a greater external acceptance as a result of their service. But these numbers are not overwhelming. And additionally, our sample size for this was 133 respondents. So with that sample size and these somewhat divided results, we can't draw a definitive conclusion that, again, serving in the United States military will actually help Latinos prove their patriotism. Okay. Looking at other categories, were they disappointed in their military experience? The modal category there was strongly disagree. Most people seem to be satisfied with their military service. Were they distrusting of the United States government's intentions in foreign wars? This is what we find is interesting. We pretty much run the gamut here. Now, the modal category is neither. Okay, 27% of respondents said, no, it didn't really impact my views either way. But you see that 38% disagreed or strongly disagreed, 33% strongly agreed or agreed with that statement. So we really see divided beliefs as they're leaving their service on whether or not they believe the U.S. government had the best intentions with getting them involved in overseas conflicts. Okay. Extending that then to looking at elected officials. Okay, modal category there is agree. So we see that 55% strongly agreed or agreed with the statement that they were distrusting of elected officials in the United States government after their military service. Now again, a lot of our respondents either served in Iraq or served in Afghanistan. This survey was done in 2014. There were still some people who questioned our involvement in the war in Iraq, which might be that could be the source of those results that we're seeing. Okay. Now, the last two questions, again, getting into this idea of whether or not, as a result of military service, they are more engaged politically. We find the answers to that are overwhelmingly yes. 69% either strongly agreed or agreed with the statement that they were motivated to become more involved in their community. And we see that over 80% of people said they were more motivated to exercise their right to vote, which from a political scientist perspective is a really interesting outcome. Those of you who have had me in Political Science 120, we talk about the concept of political efficacy, that you believe your vote matters, you believe that you can influence what government does. If you are distrusting of elected officials, you are far less likely to vote than someone who trusts and believes in the political process. So this is a really interesting finding and somewhat of a contradiction, that they leave military service less trusting of government, but they want to be more engaged in this process. Okay, so in that regard, this is a benefit of military service because, again, we see that most Americans who are not veterans, if they are distrusting of the process, if they are distrusting of elected officials, they're going to say, I'm going to stay home because I don't trust anyone. Why should I bother voting? Questions on any of these findings? Okay. So what conclusions can we draw here? Okay. Again, patriotism and civic duty are the primary drivers of why Latinos join the United States military. Economics matter, absolutely. Okay. Now, is it a pure, what economists would call, rational choice model, where Latinos are just trying to maximize their own self-interest? According to this, it's not. Patriotism and civic duty matters. But again, we don't see that the economic factors mattered as much in their decision to join. And again, one of the things we know that I mentioned earlier is that this group that we surveyed, they're not knocking it out of the ballpark when it comes to their economic station in life after their military service. So it wasn't as if those direct economic benefits of military service seemingly panned out for much of the people in our response pool. Okay. Now, again, this idea of proving patriotism, somewhat mixed. Small majority says, yes, it did improve my standing in the community, but the most common response was it really didn't have any type of impact. One of the questions we also asked them, which I don't present results for because we didn't have any findings, was did they feel they were discriminated against openly within the United States military? And most of the respondents said the answer to that was no. Now, if we look at one of the other reasons, again, we want to collect more data on this, is we want to get more female veterans into this sample. There's been a lot of attention publicly paid to the treatment of women and the amount of sexual harassment women face in the United States military. Our sample is not large enough to get at any of that. That's one of the reasons why, again, we're opening this back up and we're going to try to get a larger sample. Again, the predominantly male sample that we had found that, at least based on race and ethnicity, they're not seeing much discrimination while they are serving in the United States military, which is, again, a good thing. So again, it seems as though that discrimination will be outside of the armed forces, but within, I can only imagine the camaraderie of serving outweighs and supersedes differences in race and ethnicity. Okay. And again, from a political science perspective, we see this concept reinforced. If you serve in the United States military, you want to be more engaged. You are now more likely to want to engage in the political process and to vote in upcoming elections. Okay. Again, they are satisfied with their service. They think it was a positive experience. One of the things I didn't show up there was another question. 81% of respondents said that they have or would recommend serving in the United States military. But again, what we see as questionable is outside of their increased motivation to participate in the process and their increased patriotism and civic duty and loyalty, they're not this sample really didn't get very much out of their military service. So again, this is why we have to go back in and start looking at trying to disaggregate by age, ethnicity, and gender. Okay. So what can we take away from this? Okay. I think the economic data is where the real story is going to be going forward with this. Again, there's limited evidence for this thesis that they can prove patriotism, and this is the path for Latinos in the United States to demonstrate they are loyal to the country. But what we see is, again, when it comes to economics, most of our sample was making less than $50,000 a year. And again, most of them were of working age. Again, we saw a lot of people who had at least an associate's degree. So we see that they're taking advantage of the benefits the military has to offer. We asked them about, using VA benefits. We asked them about using the GI Bill, and most of them were able to say, yes, I was able to use these services that were available to me, which I think is also one of the reasons why they might be satisfied with their service, but it's not necessarily paying dividends when it comes to their economic outcomes and their economic station later in life. So this is our question in the next sample. Why serve? Why should we see increasing numbers of Latinos entering the United States military if it's not necessarily proving patriotism and it's not necessarily leading to better economic outcomes? Okay. One theory that we're starting to look at is essentially, is this just a grand case of altruism? Is this just a situation where Latinos believe that this might help future generations be better off? There's a concept in the race and ethnic politics literature called linked fate. This idea that regardless of your own individual circumstances, you are still impacted and your ability to be successful is still impacted by the racial or ethnic group or the community that you are a member of. So it essentially leads to then this argument of a call for a rising tide that can lift all boats. If the whole community prospers, then everyone can prosper. But individually, we might not see, if individual people prosper, we might not see those benefits spill over into the rest of the community. So as we're designing this new survey, these are some of the questions that we're asking. Has your military service, do you believe, improved your economic station in life? Why or why not? Because again, we don't see a lot of tangible benefits that are being placed on at least this sample based on their military service. So again, is it altruism? Is it concern for future generations? That's something that we have to find out more in future data. And again, what we plan to do is expand this to the American Southwest. If we're able, we're also going to start pursuing more grant money. And if we're able to do that, we will then start looking at possibly going into Florida and going into Puerto Rico, because that's one of the other things that this research needs to help move forward. When people think about Hispanics and Latinos, they think about them as this monolithic group, and they are not. Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and people of Mexican descent are very, very different. Okay, if we look simply at political ideology, Cuban Americans have traditionally been Republican because the Republican Party took a stronger line against Castro. So there's a lot more to uncover here, but I think the sort of disappointing part for us, at least as researchers, is we don't have a good answer to the question, how can Hispanics in the United States escape their skin color and demonstrate that they are loyal and they are patriotic? And again, many Hispanics have lived here their whole lives. They grew up here. They were born here. And again, just because of the color of their skin, they are reduced to they probably crossed the river illegally. And this research, at least, again, we're hoping the next sample can shed some more light on this question, but right now, that's still a black box that we don't know how to come up with an answer to. With that, I'll open it up to the floor for any questions or comments. Yes?
Adam, I have a question. I'm curious, unless I misheard you, that you used VFWs as a conduit to give your survey? And my understanding of VFWs is that they're social holes, correct?
Yes.
So do you think that even if you go to more VFWs, you're still skewing your results because you're starting with a group of people who are inclined
already
to
joiners?
Hang out?
That's absolutely a great point, and that may be a problem we're facing. Unfortunately, there's not another great mechanism unless what I'm starting to do is trying to do some FOIA requests through the United States government to get access to some records, especially related to military recruitment. But outside of VA records, it's going to be very, very difficult to get a sample to identify to go forward with this. But yes, that's definitely true. People who are joining the VFW maybe already have an inclination to participate, hence the reason we're seeing some of those numbers in terms of, one, that they're more likely to participate and they want to participate, but two, maybe they're not doing as well economically, which is why they decided to try to find a peer group and maybe network and make some connections to improve. That absolutely could be a shortcoming. And again, we'll hopefully identify that more as we get a larger sample. If anyone has any better ideas for how we can contact veterans, I'm all ears. But that seemed to be the best route for us that was available. Yeah.
Obviously, I have a little bit of a different take on this, but speaking to that point, my father is a veteran, served in the Vietnam War, and one thing he suggested when I was explaining to him this research was asking when you get a hold of whoever that is, if you can't get a hold of the quartermaster or the commander, you ask them when their next meeting is. And because of the fact that more people will be there during a meeting and it's not as much of a social hour, you get a different demographic of people to speak to, and maybe people that will be more inclined to take a survey rather than just view the VFW as a social entity.
No, and that is absolutely a great point. One of the other issues we're running into is, especially if we want to start interviewing older veterans, do we run into technological issues with them doing online surveys? The problem I run into simply is I would need a lot of grant money to be able to say, I'm going to go fly to Arizona for 3 weeks and start hitting up VFW meetings. Again, that would absolutely be the ideal. And we did experiments with that when this was done in South Texas. And we found that by going and speaking to them, when again my colleague was still living in South Texas, I was already at ESU, we did get higher response rates slightly when they were able to go in and explain it. Again, right now, as I pursue grant money, if we're finding out we're not in the second round getting enough respondents, that might have to be something we pursue and look into. Right. But that's a great point. Other comments or questions? Yes?
When you were talking about community integration, like for veterans, wouldn't it be more accurate to ask those questions from the people who would be accepting them as opposed to the people who are trying to be accepted?
I think there's value in doing both, absolutely. One of the questions, so you've heard of the old saying, perception is reality, okay? How do you feel you're being perceived by outsiders is how you are now going to view the rest of the world and is going to impact your political behavior. So, one of the things we know is there's evidence of the discrimination. That's obvious. So we kind of already can take for a given that some Latinos are not being accepted. One of the things we could look to do, which I think speaks to your point, which would be a great idea, is you can do experiments like that where, and they've done this, they've done experiments where they show people, with different shades of skin color, and based on that, they have found that people are more accepting and like people with lighter skin tones than darker skin tones. So we absolutely could do an experiment where we say, what do you perceive, or what do you think about this individual, and show a Hispanic who's in full military garb versus someone in plain clothes. That absolutely would be a good idea and something we could look into, definitely. So great point. Yeah.
I'm really intrigued on your hypothesis about possibly the altruistic is the motive, because it's individuals sacrificing for
absolutely.
a collective good.
Yep.
And I think many of us have, my own background of Russian immigrants long time ago, but you really did have the sense that they gave up so much and would work for anything, and obviously not for their lifetime, but for the children and grandchildren. And I would wonder then that this research could be really, really powerful about the immigrant experience on beyond the individual level, on the collective level. But I'm curious, how do you ask that question on there? Because you talked about the economic well-being. Are you framing questions? How do you frame that question?
So it's very difficult to ask that specific question. We absolutely cannot.
So we'll just say yes.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're asking more specifically about economics. We're asking more about what your work experience has been, because again, a lot of this data is kind of cross-sectional, and it's just where are you right now. And one of the other things we're also looking into, is disability status and things like this. So if we ask enough of these economic questions, we can kind of piece together, is this really a situation where the economic benefits are not there? And then lead to sort of process of elimination that this is altruistic. Again, we're digging a little further into, would you recommend military service? Why would you recommend military service? What did you feel was great about the experience? What do you feel, and I forget how we word this other question, but we do, what did you hope for the impact of your military service would be, or the impact of more Latinos serving in the military? So we're not using those terms, but we are, I think, dancing around it enough that we're going to get a much better idea if this is supported. Other questions or comments? Yeah, Glenn.
Okay, so in the age of Trump, and his current rhetoric, and some of the policies that we see that are getting passed in states like Arizona, do you expect some of these answers to change, when you go back in and conduct a survey?
So what we essentially see in a lot of the policies that the states are enacting is all they're doing is shifting the immigrant population, which is one of the reasons why the administration is talking a lot about sanctuary cities right now. So there are areas of the country where, they're more accepting of immigrants. But again, this is also something right now that's a worldwide phenomenon, okay? Today was Brexit Day, where, Great Britain informed the EU that they were in fact leaving and invoking that process over the next 2 years. So, we're seeing this type of anti-immigrant populism pretty much everywhere. So I don't necessarily think we're going to see significant changes to those opinions, because this is not something that's necessarily new. If some of this discrimination gets codified into law, that's when I think we might wind up seeing some individuals say, I'm not going to join the military, I'm never going to be accepted, and see how that then plays out. But part of what we're seeing is also an increase in activism in response to some of this. So I'm right now, I'm not expecting there to be a big shift in saying, no, we're gonna, throw our loyalty and our civic duty out the window. I think some people are mobilizing and, are more engaged now to demonstrate that they are part of this country. Did you?
Just curious if during the surveys that between Hispanics and Latinos, if branch of service was taken into effect.
Yes, we did ask them about branch of service. And honestly, with the sample size, we couldn't get anything that was statistically significant to demonstrate differences between the two. But with a larger sample, that is a question we asked. With a larger sample, again, we hope to disaggregate more and tease out some of those findings. Yeah.
I know this is more a question for future research, but I'm Puerto Rican, and a lot of my family has been in the military since like World War II. And I was wondering, when you get to the phase where you start to include different ethnicities of Latinos, do you know if in the literature already what kind of differences might be seen among Puerto Ricans? Because I know as a de facto kind of colony, there's a lot of mistrust in that community sometimes of the military.
I think in some instances, I think the results here bear out that there is sort of broad distrust. I think, again, if we were to get more, countries of origin into this, we might see that Cubans, for instance, might be a little more trusting. But again, that's one of the interesting findings. The distrust is there, but the willingness to serve is still there as well. And I don't think, it is, yes, absolutely Puerto Rico has a unique experience. But if we look at other indicators that we have data on and voting behavior and things like that, the political behavior is not that much different. So one of the other things that happens is generational replacement. So I don't think the political status of Puerto Rico, at least some of the data that we've looked at, not that I've looked at, but other political scientists have looked at, the political status of Puerto Rico seems to be less of an issue for younger generations. It's probably more of an issue for older generations. So I can't give you a definitive that looking at different backgrounds will matter, but in other realms it hasn't really seemed to matter as much. Again, other than the Cuban-Castro connection. But again, going back to generational replacement, we're starting to see that change. This past election, Hillary Clinton did really, really well among Cuban Americans. So again, which is a sea change from previous elections. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
Okay. So in relation to two of your variables, to the financial condition, to whether people have jobs or whether they don't have jobs, and then the other one to community acceptance. Given the demographic of South Texas, which, as you said, is, on the campus was over 80% Mexican American, Hispanic, Latino, and that mirrors the demographic of the community. That most of the vast majority of the community is Mexican American, and also that the counties of South Texas are among the poorest counties in the United States. How do you, how does that affect the musings that you've got going on about those two factors?
So, and this was a question we wrestled with, and I should, full disclosure, was waiting for Dr. Reedhead's question because Dr. Reedhead was my dean at the University of Texas Pan American, so he's very, very familiar with the university in the area. The educational attainment of this sample far exceeded what we see with the rest of the Rio Grande Valley. So with that, now, not that education is, a perfect correlation or a perfect predictor of economic outcomes, but we do know there's a pretty high correlation between educational attainment and greater income. And the fact that didn't seem to be playing out here. So you had greater educational attainment, but you still had the same sort of, socioeconomic status. That's where we felt that something was awry that deserved greater, greater investigation. If it was a situation where the educational attainment had been the same as the rest of the valley, then this is a median income of like $24,000 for Hidalgo County, which is the largest county in the region. And that would be expected. But we know the educational attainment was much higher. We know they were using the GI Bill. They had agreed to that. So why then the disconnect? If they have more education, why don't they have at least moderately better, economic outcomes? yes, no, or I see you pondering?
I think, I mean, really, I don't have any answers to it.
Yeah, that again, that's, you know,
I don't have
it
any
was,
suggestions of any.
it was fascinating and it was frustrating. Again, we had some ideas about what we expected. We didn't necessarily find that, but what we did get was all these great questions between altruism and the economic impact. So it really is now broadening what this study is going to turn into. Other comments or questions? Well, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your time. Hopefully you have a little bit of sunlight to enjoy.